Thanks very much, Evan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real delight to be here, and I am actually sort of quite blown away by two things as I stand here. One is, David, just that presentation on the leadership of delivering for the customer and what the customer actually wants. We have a population who is aware and is demanding that we deliver homes of lasting quality that meet many expectations, including those for nature and climate. So brilliant, and thank you for the leadership that you and your team are showing. And also just that presentation, that short video. Many of the faces on that screen are very familiar to me, and it represents, that presentation about the role of placemaking, the role of how we want to live our lives, and that as we evolve our towns, our cities and our villages and the countryside within which they sit, and as we deliver new places or change the places we have already, making active choices about the outcomes and the qualities that we want to create is really, really important. So thank you for lining me up with a really fantastic bit of leadership and presentation about the customer, but also some great words from some very, very wise people. I have an immense pleasure of being the Chief Planner in government, which means I'm the Senior Town Planner that sits within Whitehall, but specifically the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And I'm not going to sort of pretend that I'm going to present the whole of the government's agenda for housing and delivery, but what I am going to do is sort of highlight where the sort of outcomes we're seeking, that government is seeking in terms of design and placemaking, are sort of coming to the fore. And I suppose some of the things that are already being worked on that, and I'm sure you will have questions about. But we are national government sets the scene, in effect. We set the law, we set the regulation, but we are utterly reliant on the people in this room and also local authorities who actually deliver, who administer and deliver the planning system, and then ultimately you who deliver the development on the ground and all the kit of parts that go into that. So what you've already done is hear from quite a lot of colleagues, particularly this morning. I first of all want to just thank the Future Homes Hub, and particularly the mention in the brochure of some great partnership work we've been doing with them, particularly on how we give shape and definition to what good looks, feels and functions like in as we create homes and neighbourhoods, and some really great workshops with many of the Future Homes Hub members, just sort of really getting into that question that was just raised in the video between standard product, design and layout, meeting all those different objectives we might have for sustainable urban drainage, nature recovery and so on. And I might be asked to talk about what's new in planning, but perhaps the better question would be what's not new in planning. But I'm going to give you sort of a hint of some of the things that are going on. A little bit of a reflection first. A much wiser person than me, who actually happened to be an economic geographer. So earlier on in my career talked about, the geographies at which we do several things. The geography at which we live. And again, David talked about this. Our kind of network of friends, where we walk to take our kids to school, where we might go to doctor's surgery, where we might play in our local park and so on. There's another geography, which is the geography at which we're kind of administered and governed. At the moment, that's mostly at local authority level in terms of those sort of day-to-day services. There's another geography, which is the geography of economies, our travel to work areas, what's sometimes referred to as functional economic areas. These don't geographically align. And you could argue that actually we've got increasingly more geographies and sort of patterns of development and thinking that, particularly in the conversation this morning, were really strongly highlighted. Our energy systems, where we create energy, how we get it across the country and how we get it to the points of need. And just on that, lots of early action from this government in terms of, for example, lifting the ban on onshore wind that happened way back last autumn, and that's at a big scale, but at a micro scale, changing the rules about how you can basically install a new air source heat pump in existing homes, and the rules about proximity to neighbours. A very small micro change, but really meaningful for people thinking about air source heat pumps in existing stock. So lots of small and lots of big actions. The other system, the transport system. Another system we are so much more talking about now. The fluvial system and the system of water, our rivers, our coast, obviously very much looking at climate change in that environment, but actually how we use and discharge water and how we manage our waste. and really importantly, and I'm sure we'll hear much more from Tony on this, our natural systems, our natural landscapes, the things that live and thrive within them, or need to live and thrive in them more. And I suppose there's a really interesting question about, well, what is this all about? Why am I even mentioning this? I am a town planner. I do believe in what it is as a process and as a function. We will invariably, I'll come on to talk about how we make decisions in the planning system and making them more consistent and faster and delivering the outcomes we need. But planning at its heart is about understanding those systems and understanding how they have to interplay and happen in a place. And some interesting changes in that. Planning, when you get beyond the walls of the home, and we've talked a lot about this today, is also about how people function in their place. So we saw this morning how people's choices about how they move around, whether they're using public transport or not, is also a very significant net contributor, and we need to address in terms of the journey to net zero. And that's where planning isn't just about the home, it's about the design of the neighbourhood for all those kind of quality of life choices and decisions that David has talked about, but also about how we live our lives and use energy, make our choices in a broader setting. And so those interfaces of planning at the scale of the home, the street, the neighbourhood and the town are really sort of something that's going to be evolving in these next couple of months. But also very much about delivering that big infrastructure, those big infrastructure systems as well. And the government have already got well over 20 development consent order decisions over the line and more to come, which address those big kit of parts that we need for the country. So a few things about some of these interfaces between how people live in their home, how they live in their neighbourhood and how they live at those bigger geographies. I'm going to start with plan making. And often in these conversations, there's a lot of emphasis on decision making, how things actually get permitted and get through the system. But there are big changes going on in how we plan for change, hence my talk about geographies. And really importantly, the reintroduction of strategic planning. And I just want to mention a few things there. There was a regional spatial strategy for the southeast of England back in the day. It was sort of a document that got to a certain level of approval. And then that process of strategic planning stopped. In it, there were a few reservoirs actually planned. A shame we don't have those reservoirs now, and we're now reintroducing strategic planning, and very importantly, going to be giving mayoral combined authorities, so mayors and the geographies outside of our big cities in the form of counties and their adjacent cities, the responsibility to strategically plan for those places. And the reason I raise it particularly is because that is where the big drivers for housing growth, for economic growth, the geographies that are very specific to that location, coastal business, data centres, whether it's sort of, all those different technologies and those businesses that are starting to drive our modern economy, have to link into that infrastructure and have to link into nature and have to link into what is urban and what is rural and those sort of geographies of place. So that's an incredibly important move. We're sort of designing the new system now, and more to be said about it in the future. But I think in this conversation about planning being about delivering on all these agendas at that bigger scale, it's really important. Below that, local plans.
Yeah. A bit over time. We'll pick up some of these things. I've got
yes.
to finish, but
local plans equally have then got to make that real at the local level. Lots of things to come. We can go into it in terms of questions. We're working on the National Planning Policy Framework. That will create a framework to then have much clearer and sharper decision making at a local level. Policies not repeated and tweaked, but policies given clearly at national and then at local level. Huge amounts in the digital space, which I genuinely know is transformational in terms of how we engage communities, how we actually bring alive many of these issues that people want to see delivered on the ground. And finally, people. We need good people in local government who've got the skills to deliver all this plan making, really rapid decision making, and follow through on all of these agendas. So lots of investment going in there, for which I can take more questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.